Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Thanks to Russia's attack on Ukraine, European leaders have formally approved Ukraine as a candidate to join the EU. The bloc hasn't welcomed a new country since Croatia in 2013. But it hasn't been so straightforward for others, such as the Balkan states, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia and Albania. They all remain on a long waiting list. Will Russia increase its influence in the region? Very good to have your company. I'm David Foster. Russia's hold over the region is long-standing, from creating pro-Russian political allies to building the oil and gas infrastructure that some Balkan states are heavily reliant on. Sarah Morris reports.
The Russian offensive has strengthened the EU's relationship with Ukraine, but it's also left the Western Balkans vulnerable to Vladimir Putin's whims.
The Russian aggression towards Ukraine is a threat to all countries in the region, and in this context, European Union enlargement to the Western Balkans should be seen as a necessity, but also an investment in the security of the European Union.
Energy is the economic tool of choice driving Russian influence in Serbia, North Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Russia supplies almost all of their gas and owns multiple assets, including the Lukoil gas station network. When it comes to security, Serbia has been strengthening ties with Russia at the expense of the West. Moscow trains the country's police and military. Serbia has increased imports of Russian weapons and has received 6 MiG-29 fighters, 30 T-72 tanks, 30 other armoured vehicles, a Panzer S-1 air defence system and a shipment of Kornet anti-tank missiles. The Kremlin uses the Russian Orthodox Church to influence Orthodox populations in Serbia, Bosnia, Bulgaria, Macedonia and Montenegro. Moscow also mobilises the concept of the Slavic Brotherhood and shared Orthodox Christian values to secure its relationship with political and religious leaders. As Russia looks to grow its influence in the Balkans, EU neglect and failure to integrate its countries into the bloc risks handing over even more geopolitical power to Moscow.
Let's go first of all to Sarajevo, capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we're joined by Zlatko Lagumdžija, former chairman of the Council of Ministers. It's a complicated system, so let's equate that with being a former prime minister. In Barcelona, Anna Matviva, Russia and Eurasia affairs analyst. And in Bournemouth, on the southern coast of the United Kingdom, Charles Crawford, former British diplomat and former British ambassador to Bosnia and to Serbia. Like, if I could come to you first of all, you've been at the top tables, you've also been a foreign minister. You've had a chance to look at this for many years now. How do you think Russian influence, if it is changing, how is it changing?
Russian influence is moving very, very fast, and that's not happening out of blue. It's going on for years. And the major reason why Russian influence was becoming bigger and bigger in here is the lack of presence of United States and European Union in a sense of European integrations, and especially in a sense of NATO integration. So as much as the US and the European Union was creating vacuum and withdrawing from the Bosnia and Herzegovina, from the Western Balkan, I mean, that's as much as Russians were getting in. Now, after the war in Ukraine, I hope that the things are going to be changed. Because everyone understands that next Russian disruption in here is going to be in Western Balkan. Compared to Ukraine, in Western Balkan, Russians know, and in particular in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is the most fragile part of Western Balkan at this moment, Russians know very well that they cannot simply send 10,000 soldiers overnight to do special military operation. And there is no anyone in here, I mean, in reasonable amount of forces, even human forces, not talking about mechanical forces and so on, weapons and things like that, that could be of any help to them so they can do something which they're doing in Ukraine, or hopefully not tomorrow in Moldova and some other parts of their neighborhood. But it is very important that we do not allow Russian influence the way it is going to be if European Union and the United States do not make bigger and more serious attempt on that. Especially,
I didn't mean to cut you short. Sorry, carry on.
It is very important, not any kind of influence in here. We don't need influence of Western Western world to be supporting any kind of division of the country. It is very important that Europe and the United States stick together to make stronger Bosnia and Herzegovina as multi-ethnic civil society in which all ethnic groups, religious groups are feeling at home. That is a very important thing, and that's something which I see as a little bit tricky in latest moves of Western Alliance.
And I'm going to come to you in just a second, but I'm going to put up a list of those countries that want to be EU members but aren't. We've already had mention of Ukraine and Moldova, sort of fast-tracking, if you like, but there's Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Albania, all waiting and waiting in some cases for a number of years. If, as Zlatko suggests, it's down to incompetence or laziness that the European Union and the US are allowing Russian influence to creep in, why not fast-track these countries?
Because European Union has a logic of its own, and it is dictated largely by the domestic agenda. And domestic agenda is very much against expansion. It is actually quite worried about absorbing more countries in. We have seen Brexit, pressures to limit the influx of East European, supposedly stealing jobs from our wealthier countries. So other elites do not want to go down that route. So the logic is very much to do with the EU own priorities rather than what's happening in the Western Balkans. So certainly, if we look at it from the international relations angle, it would have looked logical that if you are saying that you can come in and keeping people waiting on the doorstep for over a decade without much
Okay, so they don't want to upset their own voters. They don't want to upset their own voters because they believe that if these countries were allowed into the European Union, people from those countries could steal their jobs. That is one reason. Charles Crawford, this is sitting on your hands, though, isn't it? Isn't it up to the political leaders to take a stance here and say we need to get these countries into the European Union because otherwise there could be untold Russian meddling, if you like?
Well, look, I mean, all these things depend upon where you start. And I remember when I was in the Foreign Office back in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union ended, the issue was, could we bring Russia into NATO and into the EU? And the problem, I think, with the EU is simply that it is so integrated on so many different levels. It's really complex and, mysterious in some ways how it all works. Bringing a country in, fast-tracking it, is just more or less impossible because they just simply have to meet certain standards. Otherwise, there just becomes a mess. And it's all very well saying Ukraine's being fast-tracked, but I mean, fast-track in this case still may mean, a decade, 20 years, who knows more. So it's clear there is a anxiety about enlargement generally, but it's also very technically difficult to bring countries in. It's much more technically straightforward to bring countries into NATO. And that's what we've, seen with Sweden and Finland. It's quite easy to absorb them. I just think that, we're talking about Russian influence as if it's something very, very strong and specific and immediate. I don't think Russia in that sense has that sort of influence. What it does is has the capacity to disrupt things. It's fundamentally a negative influence it has. And I think I'll just pick up on Zlatko's point about borders. Where Russia is really behaving terribly badly in all this is trying to change borders by force. Precedent for changing borders by force in Europe, and that's presumably the thing which is the most worrying in the Western Balkans region.
Okay, so it may not be overt at the moment, but Zlatko, let me come back to you. Let's try and pick up on a couple of insidious, if you like, examples of where Russia may be trying to change the nature of things. Would you say it is encouraging Republika Srpska to secede from Bosnia and Herzegovina, something that most of the people in that area would be terribly worried about?
Oh, let me be very clear. If, just hypothetically, thank God it didn't happen, but today Ukrainians are fighting for us being a member of Euro-Atlantic structures. Today, Ukrainians are fighting for much bigger things than Ukraine. But among other things, Ukrainians are fighting actually for the future of Western Balkan being integrated in the European Union and NATO. What I'm trying to say is, if, for example, just as you said, if Dodik called for secession back in November,
Sorry, Dodik being the head of Republika Srpska, I have to point out for our viewers, yeah.
Yeah, if he called this Republika Srpska spins off, becomes some kind of Abkhazia, Ossetia, whatever, I mean, European Union would be in complete disarray, and definitely was in complete disarray at that time. Maybe European Union forces would be placed on demarcation line between Republika Srpska and Federation. Today, it's a big different story because of lessons learned in Ukraine. Today, Dodik simply cannot afford himself to do some kind of crazy thing like secession. And because definitely there is no way that he could succeed in this after Ukrainian case. So I think it is very important to strongly support this integration forces inside Bosnia and Herzegovina and regional integration in every aspect of that meaning, giving your countries in the region much more visible and touchable, so to speak.
Okay, so Dodic now realizes he has to stand back a bit. Are the Russians equally aware of the dangers of them pushing too hard, or are they still after something like the secession of Republika Srpska?
I think, let me put it this way. They probably made a strategic mistake. They didn't ask Dodik to do it in November. Now, when they didn't succeed, because there was a plan, evident plan, that if original plan of Russia succeeded in February 24th, that they, let's say, replaced Zelensky government with some kind of puppet regime in Kiev, definitely a few days later, Dodik would call for secession. And Dodik was ready for that. It did not happen. And I think that in this case, Dodik is a little bit waiting for how the things will sort out, especially after the latest events that were happening here with the High Representative who tried to do some election changes. And thank God he stopped in changing some election changes in the middle of the beginning of elections.
Double standards, perhaps, then, Anna, from the European Union. Let's hear from Edi Rama, Albania's Prime Minister.
We know that this is not the beginning of the end. This is just the end of the beginning. But it is how it is, and it's good. We need this to continue to build a strong, democratic European Albania and a strong, democratic Western and open Balkan.
That was after Albania and North Macedonia started accession talks. That was just earlier this summer. Hope there, but not from others, Anna. Is that the case?
To some extent, yes, but we certainly should bear in mind that, firstly, the Western Balkans region generally is not as important for European Union, for Western Europe in general, compared to what it used to be. Our expectations on how the regions would progress, how peace would prevail, how regional integration would happen, they did not come true. There are still lots of problems. There is still no peace. There is a need for peacekeeping. There is a great deal of need for European and American assistance. So in that sense, there is quite a bit of frustration on the European angle from the countries of the region, Albania included. There is also quite a bit of frustration with the sense that we have down the very difficult route of trying to fulfill the EU acquis. These are the conditions which have to be certified by the European Commission. We made very hard political choices, which came at a price, but we have not really made any serious gain. We are still keeping in the Western parlor. So yes, the hope is there, but anguish and frustration and search for alternative is also a process underway.
Giles Crawford, former ambassador in the region, how many changes have you seen in the way that Russia tries to exert itself and the European Union and the US perhaps tries not to or backs off from that? How much have you seen a generational shift?
Well, I think there are some issues which stop becoming a problem and become a fact of life. And for a while in the 9000s, there's a huge, colossal international investment in that region, the Western Balkans region. But then all of a sudden, it sort of gets stuck. It never seems to quite move forward as fast as we'd like to. And then it becomes a fact of life and the attention naturally drifts somewhere else. And I think there's obviously a sense in which, because Russia is, trying to change European borders by force, that will force the whole European system, the whole North Atlantic system, to look much harder at security issues and how it defends itself against that. So I think the tone of it's clearly changed. I mean, I think the one of the strange things which is incoherent about Russian policy, and I don't want to say Western policy is always coherent, but a completely incoherent thing about Russian policy is it's saying, look, you know, Ukraine can't, it's not allowed to separate. And yet, on the other hand, it seems to be supporting Republika Srpska, which says, oh, well, maybe you can separate. So really, at the heart of all these differences, and especially in Bosnia, let's be honest, there's the real problem of how you match the borders to the communities. And this, I suppose, is what Russia is basically saying with Ukraine. You know, the Russians in Ukraine should be in Russia. They shouldn't be in Ukraine. They're trying to play with the idea of ethnicity and borders. And we saw what happened in the 1990s. If that gets out of control in Zlatko's region, it becomes a real mess because people get very, very upset about it. So it's just not clear whether or not there is in principle a right answer, and whether or not, if there is a right answer in principle, whether or not we've ever reached it. But where Russian influence comes in is to try to make everything off balance. They can't put in aid programs. They can't put in development programs. All they can do is basically put in subversion and sort of animosity. And I think, you know, it's possible for them to tune that up a bit. But in the end, I suppose it's also down to the people in the region to push back against it. It's not our job to do that, you know, 100%.
Okay, Zlatko, destabilization. That's what Charles Crawford is suggesting may be the motivation. He can't be certain. But destabilization with what end game in mind?
Well, destabilization in Bosnia and Herzegovina and then spill over to region, and I'm sure to wider Europe, is in actually preventing or destroying Bosnia and Herzegovina as one state, multicultural, multi-ethnic, civil society, secular state, shared society. That's the only way to prevent future destabilization, not only of this country, but the broader region and ultimately Europe. I'm absolutely sure that by 2030, I mean, European Union and my country and Western Balkan will be the same. Although you guys are going to be living in one big Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are going to be living in one big European Union. There's no alternative. So the end game of Russians is to make these divisions along ethnic lines in here and identify their proteges in ethnic groups. Today it's Dodik, but don't forget that few days ago, when it looked like a high representative is going to impose some election law changes, which looked as a favor to Croat secessionists and ultimately to Dodik as well. I mean, the guys who were supporting Bosnians and Bosniaks where the Russian ambassador gave such a nice, beautiful statement about saying how much they love Bosnian Muslims and we should not be frustrated because what West is doing to them, because Muslims in Russia are doing so far. The only thing he did not say, he didn't offer us to see who among us is Kadyrov and how Sarajevo will become Grozny and we become Chechens in here. That was the only thing that he didn't say. Or maybe to be Assad in Syria, be supported, so don't worry, we are going to be with you. So Russians, don't underestimate them. They will be choosing every potential opportunity to have their long, small allies and puppet players in here. Today among Serbs, tomorrow among Bosniaks, and some people may even look among Croats how it will look like. So don't forget that it is very important. Unity of the country, of this country, is actually the unity, not of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but unity of Western Balkan and unity in the long term of European Union, along being organized along European values as shared societies, as countries that are secular states with our united in diversities and so on and so on.
I wonder how demoralizing it can be for those countries that are in a queue. Anna, I'm going to come to you in a second. Croatia, we mentioned, last country to get into the European Union. This is what his former foreign minister had to say about those countries that haven't yet made it. I've lived here my entire life. The region's been in this state. Both segments of the political elites and societies have to some extent given up hope of ever being able to join the Union. So, Anna, demoralizing perhaps? I mean, I've been reading that half of the Serbian population, don't forget they've been on the list for some time, half of the Serbian population no longer want to go and join the European Union. So what do they do if they give up that hope?
They are basically disappointed with all sides because there is also not only Russia and not only the West, it's also Turkey, it's also China. everybody's offering something, everything comes with some kind of price. The elites tried to play some kind of bargaining game between all countries, but actually didn't really work out that well. So certainly the population is very frustrated. If we take Serbia, joining sanctions against Russia would not solve the immediate problems of Serbian population. It will come under quite a heavy economic and military price. In terms of Kosovo, Russia is main ally of Belgrade. So certainly there is a lot of reluctance to side with the West on that. The slow pace of, for example, sending the Serbian leadership, former Serbian leadership to The Hague to trial, which was a very great national humiliation. There is a feeling among the population that that was not appreciated, that the great sacrifice and humiliation came to nothing. And certainly people feel on one level Europeans, but also rejected by Europe.
Okay, I understand that.
And
But
that
one thing,
means
Charles
we are
Crawford,
looking
if I
at
could come to
something which
you. Anna, sorry to butt in. If I could come to you, Charles, because we've only got about 5 minutes left and I want to bring both you and Zlatko in. What I don't still understand, help me with this one, is if the Western Balkans is Europe's, as I've read, soft underbelly, it's extremely vulnerable there. Why isn't it doing more to make sure that it is protected in this area?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you think more would look like. I mean, this is, I think, is the difficulty. There are, the region's at peace. There are huge programs going on. There's all sorts of, different aid projects and masses of money has gone in. I mean, the amount of money that's gone into the region is not insignificant. And it far exceeds by orders of magnitude anything Russia has put in a constructive way. So I don't think you should give the impression that nothing much is happening. But the difficulty is somehow the political structures, certainly in Bosnia, which are divided for all sorts of reasons going back, to the very Dayton Agreement itself. But the Serbia-Kosovo problem, these are deep animosities which somehow in principle can't be solved. Look at the EU. The EU itself can't even agree whether Kosovo is a country or not. Most European countries say Kosovo is a country, should be a member state of the EU, but some EU members states themselves don't even accept that. So there are sort of philosophical divisions in all this, which there have been, frankly, since the end of the Cold War. And because they are such almost intellectual differences in some ways, it's not easy to find a way forward, and we haven't found a way forward. And Russia is going in there now, fundamentally meddling with this uncertainty, not because it has any great care or love for the people in that region. It's just because its comparative advantage is to make everyone else go off balance, because that's how its relative weakness becomes less weak.
Yeah, it might just as well meddle about, because that's what it does, and it's quite happy to see the end results of it. Charles, thank you very much indeed. Zlatko, a final word from you. Okay, the European Union, Europe, United States has put a lot into Western Balkans. According to Charles, perhaps Russia's contribution has been much, much smaller. Peace has been there for 30 plus years now. Therefore, what? Nothing really to worry about?
I would worry about only one thing. Unity of the country called Bosnia and Herzegovina. The major question is, are we going to have support from European Union and from NATO to be one united country, one country living as a shared society, or trying to never-ending story about having back on agenda, should we divide the country along some lines and ethnic lines and so on. So as far as we are going along that track, we are on a safe side. So the most important thing for me is to speed up NATO track, because for European Union it requires much more. And second thing is, in the European Union path, we should get more visible results in a near horizon. I'll just give you example. I mean, why we wouldn't have get support from European Union that we're economically integrated in the Western Balkan, but at the same time, in 5 years from now, we will be some kind of member of European economic community, the way Austria used to be, the way some other countries used to be. So there is visible progress on a path to European Union. Someone is asking me, we'll give you candidacy status today. My answer is to them, okay, you'll give us candidacy status, the one that you gave to Turkey in 1999, or the one that you gave to Macedonia in 2005. And then what? In 20 or 15 years, we'll be talking about opening the negotiations of the accession or blah, blah, call it however you want to. So I'm very precise. Speed up NATO track and keep the unity of the country. Keep the unity of the country. Anyone to question it.
Much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed from Sarajevo, from Barcelona, and from the south coast of England. Your views on the Western Balkans, very much appreciated. Thank you, wherever you are, for watching this edition of Roundtable. From me, David Foster, and the team. Until next time, goodbye.